Johnny Carson had a gift for making his guests feel at ease and for letting their true selves slip through the cracks. As Hollywood's most trusted host, he welcomed stars of every kind onto The Tonight Show, never knowing that some of them hid disturbingly dark secrets. In a studio's bright spotlight, charm and wit often masked cruelty, corruption, and even crime. Here are 9 times Johnny Carson sat across from guests who would later be revealed as truly evil. Shelley Winters. Shelley Winters was a 2-time Oscar-winning actress whose career spanned from 1940s film noir to 1980s television. Blonde, brash, and unapologetically herself, Winters built a reputation for being as dramatic off-screen as on. By the time she guested on Carson's show in the 1970s, she was a veteran star known for speaking her mind and sometimes losing her temper. Her Tonight Show appearances became the stuff of legend, thanks to one explosive incident in 1975. That night, Shelley Winters demonstrated that even Hollywood royalty could raise hell on live TV. At 55 years old, Winters appeared on The Tonight Show alongside British actor Oliver Reed, who had a mischievous glint in his eye and perhaps whiskey in his system. Things started jovially, but Reed's barbs grew increasingly sexist as the conversation went on. He declared smugly that the women's liberation movement would never survive, and that women belong in the kitchen, all while patronizing Winters on air. Shelley, a proud liberal and women's rights supporter, tried to spar verbally, interrupting him with scathing wit, but Reed persisted in provoking her. Finally, Winters had enough. She excused herself from the couch, disappearing backstage. Moments later, Shelley Winters marched back on stage, armed with a tumbler of whiskey. Without a word, as Oliver Reed rose to meet her, Winters doused the arrogant actor by dumping the entire drink over his head. The live studio audience erupted in wild cheers and applause. Reed was left standing soaked and speechless, a literal chill to his macho posturing. Carson, caught between astonishment and amusement, quickly went to commercial. That unscripted act of defiance became one of The Tonight Show's most replayed moments. Winters had publicly humiliated a fellow guest in defense of women's equality, making her both a hero to some and arguably a menace to the polite talk show format. The Oliver Reed incident wasn't the only time Shelley Winters shocked viewers. She was known for unpredictable behavior, interrupting hosts, telling off-color stories, and even offloading personal secrets. On one show, she famously tossed her wig onto the desk. On another, she brandished her Oscar at an uppity younger actress to remind everyone who the veteran was. Her fiery temperament and love of confrontation meant there was always a crackle of danger when she sat on Carson's couch. Some insiders whispered that Carson invited her precisely because she was a loose cannon who could generate headlines. Winters herself admitted in interviews that she enjoyed a good fight and never backed down from an argument. If someone on set said something she found offensive, Shelley would make them regret it. She relished her difficult reputation, once quipping that any time a director or talk show host told her to behave, it only encouraged her to do something outrageous. Rich Little. Rich Little is a Canadian-born impressionist who found fame by mimicking the voices and mannerisms of celebrities. In the 1970s, he became a familiar face on The Tonight Show, cracking up Carson's audience with spot-on imitations of everyone from Jimmy Stewart to Richard Nixon. For a while, Little was even a regular guest host, filling in for Carson and keeping the show's ratings high. But behind Rich Little's playful parade of voices lay a risky act. He dared to impersonate Johnny Carson himself. That bold move would put him squarely in Carson's crosshairs and effectively exile the talented impressionist from the show he loved. During his early Tonight Show appearances, Little's impression of Carson was generally taken in good humor. On camera, Johnny feigned annoyance when Rich slipped into a perfectly exaggerated car knack or mimicked Carson's golf swing, but he usually chuckled along. Yet insiders say Carson privately loathed being impersonated, particularly as the novelty wore off. Johnny Carson fiercely guarded his persona and wasn't keen on a comedian mocking him too accurately on national TV. As Rich Little's popularity grew, he performed the Carson impression at big events and on other shows. In Little's 1986 autobiography, he claimed that Carson's tolerance finally snapped. After 1982, Rich Little stopped getting Tonight Show invitations and was essentially banned without explanation. Carson's producers later tried to downplay it, saying Little's act had simply grown stale, but many believed Johnny's ego was bruised by the mimicry. In effect, Rich Little's greatest gift became his curse. He was too good at imitating the king of late night. The banishment was subtle but real. Fans noticed that a one-time fixture of Carson's show vanished overnight. Little himself said he was stunned that calls to book him dried up, with no reason given. He refocused on live shows in Vegas and appearances elsewhere, but the Tonight Show stage was off limits. Truman Capote. Truman Capote was a famous writer, best known for Breakfast at Tiffany's and In Cold Blood. He was celebrated for his sharp wit, unique voice, and dramatic Southern charm. With his high-pitched tone and polished style, Capote became a regular guest on talk shows during the 1970s. On Carson's stage, he looked unusual, small, well-dressed, and full of quick remarks. Viewers loved his mix of humor and gossip, but behind that friendly image was a man whose words could destroy reputations. Capote's most evil act wasn't violent. It was a shocking betrayal that cost him his friends and his peace of mind. During his Tonight Show visits, Capote told fascinating stories about writing in cold blood and mingling with his famous New York friends, the Swans. Audiences admired his openness, an openly gay, flamboyant writer in a time when few were. Yet Capote often said too much. With a sly grin, he teased about scandals among the rich, making people wonder how much he truly knew. What they didn't realize was that he was already planning to expose it all. In 1975, Capote released a story in Esquire called La Côte Basque, 1965, part of a novel he never finished. It was supposed to be fiction, but everyone in high society recognized themselves. Capote had turned private confessions into public gossip, revealing affairs and ugly secrets with barely changed names. One of his closest friends, Babe Paley, saw her own marriage mocked in print. The backlash was instant. The elite world that once adored Capote shut him out completely. His friends felt used. His name became toxic. Truman Capote had crossed a line. He didn't just bite the hand that fed him, he tore it to pieces. The Smothers Brothers. Tom and Dick Smothers, known as the Smothers Brothers, were a comedy duo of brothers whose clean-cut image hid a rebellious side. In the 1960s, they hosted the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, a variety show that began lighthearted and folksy, but soon became a symbol of the counterculture. With their guitar and bass comedy songs and their running joke, "Mom Always Liked You Best," they won over young audiences. But their jokes about Vietnam, civil rights, and censorship also brought trouble. Their constant fights with TV executives made them symbols of free speech, and to the establishment, two dangerous troublemakers shaking up television. Johnny Carson, who kept The Tonight Show apolitical, watched their story unfold but still welcomed them as guests after their own show ended in controversy. On The Tonight Show, Tom and Dick usually stayed playful, performing songs and trading mild jokes with Carson. Still, Johnny knew their sharp edge was close to the surface. Behind the scenes, Tom Smothers was battling CBS censors. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour pushed limits every week. They invited anti-war activists, bold comedians like George Carlin, and popular rock bands onto national TV. Their sketches made fun of politicians and spoke out against racism and the Vietnam War during a time when network bosses tried to control every word. The fight grew bitter. By 1968, CBS was cutting and delaying episodes, removing jokes and banning guests. Refusing to give in, Tom spoke out publicly against censorship. He even wrote to the FCC and members of Congress, asking for help in defending free speech. The TV bosses were furious. Behind the scenes, CBS executives began to see the brothers as dangerous rebels who needed to be stopped. In April 1969, things came to a head. Claiming the brothers had missed a deadline by a few days, CBS suddenly canceled the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, even though it was one of their highest-rated shows. The brothers were shocked and angry. They sued CBS for breaking their contract and years later won the case in court. Still, it was a hollow victory. Their show was gone, and their once bright TV careers faded for a long time. To the stiff establishment of 1960s television, the Smothers Brothers looked like evil agitators corrupting viewers with protest and defiance. They paid dearly for their ideals. When Tom and Dick returned to Carson's stage in the early 1970s, Johnny greeted them warmly, joking that they had become too hot for TV. He let them talk lightly about their struggles, but they avoided attacking CBS directly. Instead, they kept the tone funny. Their appearance was a reminder that comedy could still be bold and rebellious. In later years, Carson admitted that the Smothers Brothers helped open doors for edgier humor on television, saying they allowed others more freedom by pushing boundaries first. Still, Tom Smothers remained quietly blacklisted for years as a troublemaker. It wasn't until much later that the brothers were finally celebrated as pioneers who stood up for artistic freedom. Whether the Smothers Brothers were evil depended on who you asked. To young fans and other performers, they were brave heroes who fought censorship. But to the conservative powers of the 1960s, these polite, all-American brothers had turned into unexpected villains. Through comedy, they exposed hypocrisy and refused to stay silent when told to stop. Joan Rivers. Joan Rivers was a trailblazing comedian and TV host known for her sharp tongue and rule-breaking career. Starting in the 1960s, Rivers made her mark with brassy, no-holds-barred stand-up sets. By the 70s and 80s, she was one of Carson's most frequent and loved guests, often guest hosting The Tonight Show when Johnny was away. Audiences loved her cutting wit and self-mocking humor, which helped open doors for women in comedy. Under the laughs and sparkle, though, Rivers' drive would spark a feud that late-night fans still remember with a chill to this day. It changed late night for both of them. On The Tonight Show, Rivers joked with Carson with ease. Their spark showed in dozens of visits, where she teased Johnny and other guests with her trademark sharp jokes. Carson even named her his unofficial successor, his permanent guest host, by 1983. But that bond burned up in 1986. Without telling Carson first, Rivers took a big offer from Fox to host a rival late-night show. When Carson heard secondhand that his protege would launch The Late Show starring Joan Rivers against him, he felt deeply betrayed. Rivers said she tried to phone Carson, but he hung up on her in anger. The fallout was harsh as Carson banned Joan Rivers from The Tonight Show, and the ban lasted almost 30 years. In Hollywood, it became an unspoken rule that backing Rivers could get you shut out from Carson's couch. Her new show collapsed within a year, and tragically, her husband and producer Edgar Rosenberg died by suicide soon after. Rivers became a pariah in the very world she had helped make thrive. The chill around her name lingered for years. Beyond the Carson fight, Joan Rivers' evil side showed in her scorched earth comedy. She was famous for jokes that went too far. No topic was off limits, not stars' looks or personal grief, not even the Holocaust or 9/11. For example, Rivers once joked that German model Heidi Klum's revealing dress made her look like the last time a German looked this hot was when they were pushing Jews into ovens, a line that drew outrage. She also mocked singer Adele's weight without mercy, drawing boos and headlines. Rivers refused to say sorry for these jabs, calling them honest comedy. This steady use of harsh humor often made the public see her as cruel, at times. Wayne Newton. Wayne Newton, nicknamed Mr. Las Vegas, became famous as a singer and entertainer known for his smooth looks and soft, silky voice. By the 1970s, Newton was a household name with songs like Danke Schoen and his dazzling casino shows. Though not a regular Tonight Show comic, he appeared several times and was often the target of Carson's monologue jokes. Those jokes sounded playful, but they hid a bitter feud that exposed Newton's fierce temper. Behind his polished smile was a man who could be tough and even intimidating when he felt wronged, showing a surprising dark side to his charm. In the late 70s and early 80s, Carson began tossing out sharper jokes, suggesting that Newton was too effeminate, or worse, mixed up with the Las Vegas mob. At that time, rumors spread about Newton's supposed links to organized crime, claims he angrily denied. As the teasing grew, Newton's patience snapped. After months of private frustration, he stormed into Carson's NBC office in Burbank to confront him face-to-face. Newton later said he asked Carson's producer to leave and told Johnny directly that the insults would stop, or I'll kick your ass. Carson, known for his cool attitude, had finally met someone who scared him. Publicly, Newton later called Carson a mean-spirited man who had quietly hurt many people behind the scenes. The story shocked Hollywood and showed just how dangerous Newton's temper could be when pushed too far. Their feud didn't end there. Newton believed Carson's powerful influence in the media helped spread the mob stories that nearly ruined him. In 1980, while Newton was buying the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas, NBC aired a report hinting he was secretly backed by the mafia. Furious, Newton filed a defamation lawsuit against NBC and won a huge $5.2 million verdict in 1986. The win was short-lived. An appeals court later overturned it, but the damage was done. Newton's squeaky clean image was scarred, and his reputation never quite recovered. The once adorable teen crooner had shown a ruthless streak, willing to fight anyone who crossed him. Even decades later, Newton's confrontation with Carson stood as one of Hollywood's most shocking backstage showdowns, a reminder that behind the glitter of Mr. Las Vegas was a man who could be as fierce as any mobster he was accused of knowing. Charles Grodin. Charles Grodin was an actor and comedian known for his dry, deadpan delivery and scene-stealing roles in films like The Heartbreak Kid and Midnight Run. Polite and unassuming in appearance, Grodin nevertheless became one of The Tonight Show's most perplexing guests. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, he showed up on Carson's stage repeatedly, not to delight the host, but to seemingly torment him, albeit in on the joke fashion. Grodin perfected a confrontational talk show persona. He would act peeved, difficult, or utterly unimpressed, leaving audiences and Carson wondering if there was real tension or just deadpan comedy. This performance art of provocation was so convincing that it earned Grodin a pseudo-ban from The Tonight Show, as some viewers, and Carson himself, weren't entirely laughing. On air, Grodin's segments were famously combative. He might roll his eyes at Carson's questions, give curt answers, or criticize the show itself. In reality, it was an act. Grodin deliberately played the role of the worst guest imaginable as a form of satire. But in the moment, Carson sometimes bristled. During one appearance, a mock argument escalated until Carson declared he'd never invite Grodin back. For a time, Johnny indeed kept him off the guest list. NBC even received angry letters from confused viewers who didn't get the bit. They truly thought Grodin was an evil guest, behaving disrespectfully. Grodin's commitment to this adversarial character blurred the line between comedy and genuine malice. Many tuning in felt a palpable discomfort. Was this mild-mannered actor really attacking their beloved host? Behind the scenes, Grodin was actually friendly with Carson, and the friction was a put-on. Yet the satirical rudeness had consequences. Carson's pride was dented enough that Grodin's invitations became scarce for a while. Meanwhile, Grodin carried the shtick over to other shows, especially with David Letterman, where their faux shouting matches became legendary. Letterman enjoyed the gag, even if some audiences were baffled. In an era when talk show guests were expected to be gracious, Charles Grodin reveled in breaking the rules. His evil on-screen persona was that of the guest from hell, interrupting, scolding the host, and generally turning the talk show format upside down. It was bold performance art that could fall flat or even appear genuinely hostile. Morton Downey Jr. Morton Downey Jr. stormed onto late-night television in the late 1980s like a furious storm. With his loud striped jackets, ever-present cigarette, and habit of screaming in people's faces, Downey was the total opposite of Johnny Carson's calm and witty style. He hosted the Morton Downey Jr. Show, a wild syndicated talk show that ran from 1987 to 1989 and became known as the birth of trash TV. Every night, Downey turned his stage into a shouting circus. He loved confrontation, deliberately stirring up his guests and audience to provoke chaos. He called himself a loudmouth, and he truly was, proudly inviting shock jocks, skinheads, and outrageous personalities who guaranteed a fight. He didn't just want to entertain, he wanted to rile people up. Though he never sat on Carson's couch, his name came up in Johnny's monologues. Their audiences overlapped, but the two hosts couldn't have been more different. Carson teased, Downey attacked. Where Carson used charm, Downey used fury. And his fiery act, built on anger and spectacle, would eventually consume him. From the start, Downey's show was a mix of mayhem and spectacle. Viewers either loved the raw energy or were disgusted by the chaos. Each episode was unpredictable. Guests shouted over one another, audience members heckled from the stands, and Downey always had the last, loudest word. He'd puff smoke directly into a guest's face to show contempt or scream, "Zip it," until they fell silent. His fans cheered his no-nonsense style, seeing him as a fearless everyman taking down hypocrites and elites. Critics, however, saw something much darker, a performer feeding off anger and hate. In one infamous episode, chairs were thrown during a full-blown brawl between guests. In another, Downey clashed with a trans woman, shouting crude slurs that would be unthinkable today. He even hit a journalist during filming, grabbing a microphone boom and smashing it over the man's head. Downey seemed addicted to pushing limits. The louder the argument, the higher the ratings. But eventually, even he went too far. The breaking point came in April 1989, when Morton Downey Jr. made national news with a shocking claim. He said that while at a San Francisco airport, a gang of neo-Nazi skinheads had attacked him in a restroom, cut his hair, and drawn a black swastika on his face with ash. The story spread instantly, with tabloids and TV stations reporting the brutal hate crime. For a brief moment, the public pitied him, but cracks appeared in his story almost at once. The swastika on Downey's cheek was drawn backward, as if he'd made it himself while looking in a mirror. Police found no witnesses, no suspects, and no sign of any struggle. Within days, investigators concluded what the public soon accepted. Morton Downey Jr. had faked the entire thing for publicity. The attack was a desperate stunt to regain attention as his show's ratings plunged. Instead of reviving his fame, the hoax destroyed it. Downey became a national punchline. Newspapers mocked the sloppy lie, and audiences turned away in disgust. By the summer of 1989, the Morton Downey Jr. show was canceled in disgrace. His fall was fast and final. The man who built his fame by humiliating others was now humiliated himself. Facing lawsuits and financial ruin, Downey filed for bankruptcy. The loudmouth of late-night TV had gone silent. In later interviews, a subdued Downey admitted he had gone too far, saying the over-the-top persona had taken control of his life. He expressed regret for his cruelty and chaos, though few believed it was genuine. Ironically, years later he became an anti-smoking advocate after developing lung cancer, a tragic twist for the man once famous for blowing cigarette smoke into people's faces as a power move. By the time he died in 2001, Downey was a faded memory, a cautionary tale of fame, ego, and excess. In hindsight, Morton Downey Jr. was more than just a TV bully. He was a warning about where entertainment was heading. His show paved the way for the shock tactics, later seen in tabloid talk shows and reality TV. He proved that rage could be a spectacle, but also that such rage eventually burns itself out. Downey's brief, explosive career showed how the hunger for attention can destroy even the loudest voice in the room. For all his bluster and bravado, he ended his life quietly, a man who once screamed for the spotlight, only to be consumed by its glare. Morton Downey Jr. may have thrived on outrage, but in the end, it was outrage that brought him down. Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby was once affectionately known as America's Dad, a great comedian and actor who created the family-friendly sitcom The Cosby Show. He had a warm, wise persona, wearing colorful sweaters and dispensing gentle life lessons on television. On stage, Cosby's stand-up routines about childhood and parenthood endeared him to millions. He was also a favorite of Johnny Carson's, appearing on The Tonight Show over a dozen times starting in the 1960s. Cosby's quick wit and affable storytelling made him a talk show natural. He and Carson shared many laughs. For decades, Bill Cosby's public image was squeaky clean, representing wholesome humor and educational advocacy. All of that concealed what we now know was one of Hollywood's darkest secrets. In Cosby's case, the term truly evil is no exaggeration. Behind the fatherly facade lurked a serial sexual predator who preyed on women for decades. Whispers of Cosby's misconduct existed in Hollywood, but they were largely suppressed until the 2010s. It was an open secret that Cosby, despite being married, was a womanizer. What wasn't known publicly was that he was allegedly drugging and sexually assaulting women routinely. The dam broke in October 2014 when comedian Hannibal Buress called Cosby a rapist on stage, a clip that went viral. This catalyzed dozens of women to come forward with their own Cosby horror stories. One by one, they described a chillingly similar modus operandi. Cosby would befriend or mentor them, offer a drink laced with sedatives, and then, as they drifted out of consciousness, violate them. These incidents dated back to the 1960s and continued into the 90s, spanning Cosby's entire career peak. The consequences were swift. Cosby's reputation collapsed virtually overnight. Reruns of his shows were pulled off the air. Honors and honorary degrees were revoked en masse. Many who had admired his moralizing over the years. Cosby often lectured the black community about proper behavior and had styled himself as a role model, felt betrayed and angry at his hypocrisy. In 2015, Cosby was criminally charged for one of the few cases that hadn't passed the statute of limitations, the 2004 drugging and assault of Andrea Constant in Pennsylvania. In 2018, Cosby was convicted of aggravated indecent assault in that case. At age 80, the comedian was led away in handcuffs, the first major celebrity of the #MeToo era to be imprisoned. He served nearly 3 years of a 10-year sentence before the conviction was overturned in 2021 on a legal technicality, a decision that outraged many, though it didn't deem him innocent. As of 2025, Cosby remains a free man, but his legacy is irredeemably tainted. In civil court, he has since been found liable for sexually abusing a 16-year-old girl at the Playboy Mansion in 1975, adding to the legal judgments against him. For Johnny Carson fans, the Cosby revelations cast old Tonight Show clips in a new light. Carson had jovially interviewed Cosby many times, utterly unaware of the monstrous double life his guest was living. One eerie example. In a 1985 Tonight Show visit, Cosby jokes about trying to slip something into women's drinks. The audience laughs, assuming it's harmless humor. In retrospect, it's a horrifying moment of a predator almost confessing in plain sight. Bill Cosby's fall from grace is perhaps the most shocking of all 9 figures on this list. The magnitude of his betrayal, of his victims, and of the public's trust is immense. He went from being the moral voice of a generation to the face of celebrity sexual predation. In the court of public opinion, and certainly in the eyes of his accusers, Cosby is truly evil. If you enjoyed uncovering Hollywood's darker side with us, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more untold stories from the Golden Age.